CHROs तो हमने बहुत सुना है, but Director of Global Compensation, who are these people and how can somebody make their career to reach at this point?
Think of global comp as data geeks plus diplomats. So I'm breaking up the title into global and compensation.
Okay.
Compensation is the intersection of HR, finance, maths, business. And then global is where I'm kind of servicing clients, let's say across Beijing, Bangalore and Boston, all at the same time. So I need to understand that in the 60-65 countries across the globe, you need to be comfortable with numbers. You don't, most HR professionals are a little scared of numbers.
Right.
So the reality is that compensation as a domain requires you to work with numbers. So that's one. The other is, I don't think you need any kind of certification to start, but just the basics of understanding reward philosophies and principles.
मेरी एक relative है and she was a fresher, she passed out from a college and she got offered from Expedia 40 lakhs of CTC. बट उसमें जो फिक्स था वो 25 to 30 के बीच का ही था, बाकी सब उसको ESOPs and other compensations, ये सब rewards थे.
Like I said, unless somebody understands it, it's not a reward, it's a riddle, right?
So now this person who got 40 lakhs of CTC as variable and everything, now this person wants to switch after 4 years itself, but this person couldn't get take pride of this ESOP thing and everything because 5 years उसने complete किया ही नहीं अपनी company में, so उसको मिला ही नहीं वो सब. So now the switch that the person would do, उसको वो 40 lakhs पे switch करना है कि जो fixed था उस पे switch करना है.
So people who are hiring are not stupid to know what is it that you've actually got or not.
Have you ever felt कि boardroom में ऐसा कुछ हुआ है where you have heard less just because of your gender? So please tell us some red flags and green flags that you see in the people when you hire people in your team.
Biggest green flag for me is
Hello everyone, I'm back again with another exciting episode on pitchhnhire's YouTube channel. आज के एपिसोड में हम मिलने वाले हैं एक ऐसी पर्सनालिटी से जिन्होंने HR और लीडरशिप की दुनिया में अपना सॉलिड इम्पैक्ट बनाया है. Director at BCG, Atal Samman by Indian government, HR and 40 under 40, and other than this TEDx speaker as well. OMG, we are gonna learn a lot from her. उनका नाम सुनते ही प्रोफेशनलिज्म और पावर दोनों याद आते हैं. So guys, let's welcome the unstoppable Arshiya Singh with us. Arshiya, get ready because आज का जो पॉडकास्ट होने वाला है it's gonna be very spicy. आपको सेफ हम खेलने नहीं देंगे और हम आपसे बहुत सारी बातें निकलवाने वाले हैं. So guys, let's ready without stopping. हम सीधा अर्शिया की तरफ जाते हैं और उनसे क्वेश्चंस पूछना स्टार्ट करते हैं. So thank you Arshiya first of all for being here and taking time. सबसे पहले आप हमें ये बताइए, HR, CHROs तो हमने बहुत सुना है, but Director of Global Compensation, who are these people and how can somebody make their career to reach at this point?
No, it's a very good question, and thank you for having me. Think of global comp as data geeks plus diplomats. What I mean by that is compensation is at the intersection of HR and maths, and it's almost at the crossroads of talent and business. So what that means is that anybody who's comfortable with numbers has some bit of common sense and really understands the cultural nuance across the globe. So I'm breaking up the title into global and compensation.
Okay.
Compensation is the intersection of HR, finance, maths, business. And then global is where I'm kind of servicing clients, let's say across Beijing, Bangalore and Boston, all at the same time. So I need to understand that in the 60-65 countries across the globe, what are the cultural nuances that one has to take care of while designing some of the compensation strategy.
प्लीज़ आप एक थोड़े से सरल शब्दों में बता दीजिए कि अगर मुझे इस पोजीशन पे जाना है ग्लोबल कॉम्पेंसेशन मैनेजर की, एंड इफ एज एन HR आई वांट टू स्विच माय करियर फॉर दिस पर्टिकुलर डोमेन, व्हाट ऑल वुड आई हैव टू गो थ्रू? क्या मुझे कुछ सर्टिफिकेशंस करनी होंगी? क्या मुझे MBA के थ्रू ही ये पोजीशन मिलेगा? एंड लाइक a zero to roadmap.
Right. It's a very good question again. I think so a couple of things, right? One is if somebody is just starting their career. So like I said, at least when I've hired in the past or even when I was hired, I didn't have any compensation background. When I started my career in a compensation role, I didn't have any compensation background because all you need to know is basic mathematics. You need to be comfortable with numbers. You don't, most HR professionals are a little scared of numbers.
Right.
So the reality is that compensation as a domain requires you to work with numbers. So that's one. The other is, I don't think you need any kind of certification to start, but just the basics of understanding reward philosophies and principles. There's enough material online, right? Like there are the consulting comp organizations like Mercer, Aon, Willis Towers Watson, Korn Ferry. There's a lot available in the public domain that people can just read. So no specific certification. But yeah, I think people can. And the second part of your question was if somebody wants to switch. I think if you've already worked, it's a much easier shift, right? Like if you've, let's say you've been an HR generalist and now you want to be a comp professional,
right,
that's a much easier move because the internal clients of a comp professional are typically the HR guys. So the HR guys will know what exactly they need from the comp professional. So if the tables turn, they'll be able to resonate more.
So this profile is available in almost all the companies, or it is available in limited number of companies?
So I would argue that the flavors of compensation professionals will be slightly different in different companies, but there will be compensation teams in different companies. They may call them total reward teams, where it's not just compensation but compensation and benefits. There may be pure compensation teams.
Right.
There may be compensation teams that are doing more operations like payroll and some of that, but every organization is likely to have compensation teams, and I'll tell you why. Because it's important for people listening to this to understand that the biggest cost for any company is the cost of its people.
Right.
And at the year end, when salary appraisals are happening and some of that, it is the comp head that sits with the finance person and assesses what that investment versus cost would be.
Okay. So what is the biggest challenge in building a compensation strategy, and how do we create it?
So it's a very deep question. I think we'd need a couple of months to answer something like that. Look, a compensation strategy needs to sit at the intersection, like I said, of the business strategy and the talent strategy. So everything in the end has to drive the business goal. Otherwise, it's just something on paper. It doesn't make sense. So if my business strategy is to grow in revenue, or if my business strategy is to increase my geographical footprint, or if my business strategy is to increase my margins, I will design my talent strategy. What does that mean? The kind of people I hire, the skills that I need them to have, how often am I promoting them, what are their KPIs, how am I measuring some of that. So the talent strategy is the next step after the business strategy, and then comes comp, because compensation strategies are designed to attract and retain the kind of people you want to drive your business strategy. Now, when you talk about more tactfully, what does it mean? So you need to have a compensation philosophy to have a compensation strategy. What that means is, what are you targeting in the market? Who are your talent competitors? Not business competitors, but your talent competitors, and they can be very different things. So for instance, for a management consulting firm or for a professional services firm, it's not just the big 4 or big 5 or big 3.
Right.
It could also be startups or private equity firms from where you're getting people.
Correct.
So who are your talent competitors? What percentile of the market in terms of pay do you want to target, and how much can your business afford? So we can't ignore the affordability side of it. What that means is that, let's assume I'm a startup, and you would know this, that startups need to quite often pay a lot more than established brands because they don't have the brand.
True.
So why will people join an unknown company? It doesn't do anything to their status or their resume and things like that. So how do they compensate for lack of brand? By possibly paying higher.
Right.
So they might say that, okay, I don't have a brand, but I'll pay at the 75th percentile of the market, but I want the best. I want the best. So that's their strategy.
Correct.
Now, if I am a established legacy parental kind of company, I'll say, no, I've been here around for 100, 150 odd years. People, just the fact that they work for us is a feeling of pride.
Right.
So I don't need to target the 75th percentile of the market. I'll target the 50th percentile of the market, and I'll still get great guys.
Right.
Because I'll bring in those people and they will learn on the job and they'll start contributing effectively.
Got
So
it.
like I said, who are your talent competitors? What percentile of the market are you targeting? And then you start to think about how do you localize it. So going back to global comp, right? Now you've got a broad-based philosophy, competitors, percentile, but now what does it mean for Japan? What does it mean for India?
Right.
So that's where then you really need to understand the market data, the recruitment data. You need to see affordability. How much can your business afford in that market?
Right.
How do your P&Ls run? And then therefore, how is it that you're going to make this structure sustainable? So let's assume, again, going back to the startup, and this has happened in reality, right? Like startups have paid through their nose,
Right.
then they've gone bust.
Okay.
So I think it's a balance between fair pay and competitive pay.
Okay, fair enough and very well explained. So जब आप compensation बनाते हैं this particular thing, so how do you make sure कि local like India, and how does it vary in other countries?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, going back to common sense, right? Like, obviously, I'm not going to, even in common currency, I'm not going to get the same money here that I'd get in the US.
Yeah, of course.
Obviously, there are, foreign exchange differences, there are cost of living differences and some of that. So one is that there are essentially differences in cost of living and foreign exchange. The second thing is that you try to see that what would maintain the same standard of living. Despite the cost of living and some of that, for the same job and same skill set, right? So, like I said, if as an organization broadly, you have an overarching philosophy of saying, I'm going to target the 50th percentile of the market.
Right.
Whether it's the US, whether it's India, whether it's Japan, whether it's anywhere, I'm going to target the 50th percentile of the market. That 50th percentile in terms of number will obviously be different for the reasons that I just told you, right? Like foreign exchange, cost of living, all of that. And then you kind of look at similar job, similar pay, obviously while accommodating the statutory requirements. So, there may be minimum wage differences in different parts of the globe where you definitely have to pay a certain baseline. So, like I said, fair pay and competitive pay, it is a very tight balance. And of course, pay equity doesn't mean equal amount of money.
Right.
Right? It just means that it needs to be fair and explainable in very clear language why, let's say, structures of pay are the same or structures of pay are different.
So let's talk about India only. So जब ऐसा होता है कि बहुत सारी कंपनी जो ESOPs से देती हैं और they also give the equities as well कि अगर आप 10 years complete करोगे you will get certain amount of equity. That mostly happens in the startups or mid-size companies, right? So how does this work in the bigger companies?
Yeah, see, it's a good question again on ESOPs, because I think when it comes to stock options and when it comes to equity, unless it's easy to understand, it's not a reward, it's a riddle.
Right.
I've realized this, right? Like, there'll be many companies who will window dress their offer letters to say you'll get these many ESOPs and this and that. A lot of candidates and employees actually think of ESOPs as a lottery ticket. That we don't know whether we'll get it, we don't know if we'll get it, will we even get a payoff or not, and things like that. So I think when it comes specially to ESOPs, clear communication, having people see value in it, because if you're giving them something, they don't understand it, there's no point. You're still spending the money, right? Like, you're still investing, but the person hasn't really understood, am I going to cash in, is this ever going to be mine,
right,
or not? So it just feels like a little bit of a shiny promise,
right,
that you don't know hoga nahi hoga and things like that, right? So a lot of companies actually, if it's not easy to explain, a lot of companies actually think of alternatives like RSUs, or they'll think of higher variable pay, like in terms of just bonus or short-term incentives and things like that. Equally, stock options and long-term incentives or equity are more an option for listed companies. They're not really an option for, let's say, partnership firms or like some of these law firms, etc., right? So they always have to look for alternate vehicles to think about long-term stickiness.
Correct.
The every reward vehicle needs to have a clear objective. So if I overly simplify this, if you think of total reward, you will have base salary, which is your fixed pay. Then you will have short-term incentives, which is performance bonus, sales bonus, things like that. Then there might be long-term incentives, which you spoke about. There'll be stock options or RSUs or ESOPs or some of that. And then there are benefits. And then there's a culture of the organization and affiliations and this and that, and everything put together forms the EVP of the company. And that's where compensation has to support the EVP. See, compensation can't be looked at in isolation. The other mistake that a lot of companies do, and you know, all of us have done this, is see, it's the easiest to throw money at a problem, right? Like if somebody is going to leave, just pay him more. No, but what's the problem? Why is the person really disengaged? Often,
Correct.
comp is not the problem.
Right.
Often it's something else. So I think, you know, because it does go back to affordability, it is spend, it is cost for the company. So I think rather than react and throw money at a problem, it's important to also pause, reflect, and try to really investigate what the issue is, and try to kind of solution more holistically.
So please guide our freshers who are coming into the industry right now. For example, I'll give you an instance कि मेरी एक relative है, and she was a fresher. She passed out from a college, and she got offered from Expedia 40 lakhs of CTC. बट उसमें जो फिक्स था वो 25 to 30 के बीच का ही था, बाकी सब उसको ESOPs एंड अदर कॉम्पनसेशंस, ये सब रिवॉर्ड्स थे. बट आई डोंट थिंक एक फ्रेशर को ये सब चीज़ें समझ आती हैं. बट उन्होंने सोचा कि यार 40 तो मैं आई कैन से एवरीबडी कि आई गॉट 40 lakhs of CTC, बट इन हैंड जो आ रहा है वो तो आ ही रहा है. So what kind of questions these freshers can ask from the company to get the clarity?
Yeah. So again, great question, right? And like I said, unless somebody understands it, it's not a reward, it's a riddle, right? So one element of it, like you said, is just the social validation.
Right.
That, oh, I've got a package of this much. But what are you really getting in hand? So I think, again, compensation and understanding pay structures is an important skill, not just for comp professionals, but for any employee who's working and receiving a pay slip. So see, and across the globe, the pay structures will vary because the statutory and regulatory requirements are different. So India is unique in the sense that it's only in India that we have like a basic and HRA and LTA and all of that, right? And we have certain allowances that are taxable, we have certain allowances that are tax exempt and some of that. That's not the situation in the US. So, like I said, overly simplified, it is to say, what is my fixed pay? So basic plus fixed allowances, all of these allowances is your fixed pay. You will get that in your monthly payroll. So one is what is fixed, what is variable. So when you talk about variable, it is things like bonus. Now often in offer letters, they will talk to you about a target bonus percentage. Right? A good question to ask is, what does this target mean? What is the probability that I will get 25% of my base pay?
Right.
Like, how will I achieve it? What are the kind of KPIs? Equally, if you ask them historical questions to say, typically, how many people get above 25%? And what does it take? Because 25% is target. What if you're a one-rater? What if you're a top performer? How much can that 25% go to? Can it become a 30? Can it become a 50? And then what is the pay structure? Equally, can you even get zero? The other thing is cut-off date for eligibility. So, especially when you've just got an offer, you need to ask, depending on the time that you got the offer and your date of joining, is will you be eligible for the next pay review? Will you be eligible to get bonus, depending on, because let's say in your last company you're foregoing that bonus. When you're joining the new company, maybe you're not eligible.
Right.
Then in terms of negotiation, should that organization absorb some of that loss or not? So I think this is an important, thing for everybody who's entering into the corporate to really understand the pay structure. Today there's so much knowledge available that you can do your own research, be it on ChatGPT or whatever, to understand what's happening, what are the right questions to ask.
So now this person who got 40 lakhs of CTC as variable and everything, now this person wants to switch after 4 years itself, but this person couldn't get take pride of this ESOP thing and everything because 5 years उसने complete किया ही नहीं अपनी company में, so उसको मिला ही नहीं वो सर. So now the switch that the person would do, उसको 40 lakhs पे switch करना है कि जो fixed था उस पे switch करना है, and if that person wants to switch on 40 lakhs itself, तो वो कैसे justify करेगा उसको?
See, the thing is that that when, let's say, you're interviewing, or when organizations, let's say you've gone through an interview process and you've cracked the interview and you've got a new offer letter, and now it's come to salary negotiation phase, right? They will ask you for proof. They will ask you for the last 6-12 months pay slips. So people who are hiring are not stupid to know what is it that you've actually got or not. You can always show them the offer letter, but they will see that, the person actually received only this much, and so on top of that it's still a 30% hike. So again, I think it's a little bit of so it's a two-way street, right? Because I'm going back to EVP. When you've joined, let's say something like an Expedia, their EVP was to say that if you guys do great and stick around, then we will give you part ownership of the firm, right? Like if the firm does well, you do well. Now, if this individual chose to move, firstly, it was a choice. That individual chose to move. They could have stuck it out for a year more and then seen what needed to be done. Now, the new organization that you join, let's say it's something, you know, like I said, like a very parental kind of organization. They don't offer ESOPs to everybody, but they offer a great culture, a great, you know, work-life balance, you know, great peer network, you know, opportunity to travel everywhere, blah, 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 blah. And they might say, look, it's still a hike from the total comp that you received. The total comp, not even just the fixed or whatever. It's still a hike because while you were told that you will get 45, you actually ended up getting only this. Equally, I think if there are other, and it all depends on how the interview process goes, right? Like if the person comes across as a star and the person is negotiating hard, if it is within the boundaries of the comp philosophy or the reward philosophy of the new organization, I'm sure they'll stretch. There is some level of flex, but most global organizations do have like a certain range within which they can flex for a role, because in the end you're paying for a role. So this is very important to remember. You're not paying. So they typically talk about the 3 P's. They say pay for person, pay for position, and pay for performance.
Got it.
Pay for position is the salary range for that role, which can be different in different companies, right? Different sizes, different this, different that. The kind of flex during negotiation at offer stage or the kind of increments that you get at year end is pay for person.
Got it.
And how competitive that is to market and some of that. The pay for performance bit is bonus, largely, and also your increments to some extent, but largely bonus.
And what is your view on pay transparency? क्योंकि आजकल तो सब कुछ is available on Glassdoor and everything, and employees can actually compare the salary gaps. So, what is your view on that?
It's a very hot topic right now, especially in the globe. So, obviously, most listeners would know that the US has pay transparency laws, and this goes back even a decade, and this is different by state in the US. Equally, there is a EU pay legislative as well. So the EU is also kind of getting very strict on, you know, pay transparency and what you publish externally, etc., and things like that. And then there is the UK pay legislation as well. So the reason I'm saying this, and in Asia, Australia and New Zealand have a certain legislation where they have to publish pay gaps externally. Japan has some regulations around it. See, the reason I'm saying this is that so far India has been kind of insulated in terms of the regulatory requirement of publishing pay ranges that are stamped with the approval of the company. So so all the regulations that I spoke about, it is the organization that will need to publish it externally. Now, you made mention of things like Glassdoor and things like that. As comp professionals, we don't take that as a source of truth. I'll tell you why. Because Glassdoor typically will have, let's say, things like titles and pay. What that title means in the internal career hierarchy or architecture of X company versus Y company, it's not an apple-to-apple comparison all the time. So obviously the idea is that lean on, you know, your compensation teams to give you good market intelligence. We typically obviously partner with a lot of vendors that I talked about. So, you know, it could be Mercer, Willis Towers Watson, Aon, Korn Ferry, McLagan, there's a bunch, Radford. And then you kind of do all of your analysis and things like that. Now, like you said, we can't ignore the reality that right now we're in an age, even in India now, if I talk about specifically in India, because outside in some of these places that I mentioned to you, there the companies themselves are publishing, so you have to take that. They're at a different phase of pay transparency. India's not there yet. recently, I think it was last week or something, you would have seen that there in the Times of India there was an article by Amazon and Meta and some of this where they've actually been very transparent about their pay practices. And that degree of transparency being published in the Times of India, I myself was surprised. So I don't think India is insulated from that wave of change. We also have to get our house in order. The other thing is that many global companies that have presence in India also have a decision to make. Do we follow global practice and have one practice of transparency across the globe, or do we do things differently in different markets unless it's legally required for us to do it? Now, we typically, more than Glassdoor, we rely on intelligence from recruitment teams. So if I'm in the compensation team, I will also have a recruitment team that is hiring for different profiles. I will ask them, what are the candidates you're targeting? What are they saying is their current / expected pay? Which kind of companies are they from? What are the typical years of experience do they have? And the conversation then has to tie back to our talent strategy. So for instance, I'm not going to hire somebody that is meant to, so quite often, people will come to us and say that, compensation ranges are too low, nobody is accepting any offer, you need to do something.
It happens.
Now the issue is that when I start to look at, some of the candidate profiles and who's rejecting your offer, show me, who are these people? Sometimes one realizes that for entry level positions, you're actually trying to hire people with 8 years of experience. Now the thing is, that's not a compensation problem. That's a hiring strategy / talent problem where you need to hire at the right level because you're actually disadvantaging the person also. Recruitment has to speak to comp, has to speak to talent, has to speak to business, so that it all kind of makes sense. In terms of where India is in that journey, so a lot of these regulations that I spoke about actually do not allow recruiters to ask individuals for their current pay. Because the idea is same pay for same job, right? So it doesn't matter what you're earning right now, but in my organization, if you have the skills required for the job, you'll kind of get the same pay, right? But in terms of India, that still happens. It's almost hygiene. What's your current pay?
Right.
How much are you expecting? So I don't think we're there yet in terms of, but specific to your Glassdoor example, I would discourage, compensation teams to take that as their source of truth. It's not, because quite often you can't really, but do we have difficult conversations about it? Sure. But if everybody just has to take Glassdoor as the truth, then you don't need a comp team.
Right. Got it. So what is important today, Arshiya? Paying fairly, paying talent fairly or paying talent competitively?
It's a good question. It's like you asking me, do you want to be a good mom or a cool mom? I want to be both, right? So I think paying fairly and paying competitively, good compensation strategies will strike the right balance between these two. So paying fairly is a little bit like getting your house in order, to say that your foundation has to be strong. See, fair pay will encourage trust and loyalty in your workforce, and that will enhance productivity. But paying competitively will give you that sharp edge to actually attract and retain the right kind of guys. If, gun to head, I had to choose, my personal bias would be towards fair pay, because if that's not your grounding, people are going to leave. So it has to start with fair pay, and it has to be augmented with competitive pay, but it has to be a good balance.
Right. So after this much conversation, Arshiya, I have already feel कि you're a strong opinionated woman. But then have you ever felt कि boardroom में ऐसा कुछ हुआ है where you have heard less just because of your gender?
See,
and how did you handle that situation?
Yeah. Look, a couple of things. I think I personally have been lucky because I feel like HR in general is quite female dominated.
Right. That's
compensation teams are a good mix, sometimes not so much female dominated, but they're usually a good mix. So it's a very relevant question, and I think you don't feel it as much in the early phases of your career, you start to feel it a little more as you grow.
Right.
I've also had a lot of, female managers and female leaders and, very good role models. Even, my own mom is a very strong woman in her own right and things like that. So I don't think that I've faced it as much. But sometimes even if you face it, I don't think that you want to recognize it to yourself. It is important. I do see that, today things are changing quite a bit. There's a lot more recognition. I've not faced gender bias as much. Ageism a little bit. Because I think, when people see me or when people talk to me, they're like, oh, you're a direct, like, I think the number of years that I've worked and, how I've grown, sometimes, or even, let's say, sometimes how one appears,
Correct.
it doesn't marry into, so going back to those stereotypes of grey hair and things like that, like you're smart if you're older. And I think there's nothing wrong in wisdom that has been assimilated from tenure, because I think there's a lot of value in it. But I think, like you said, the new generation of people are way smarter than we ever were when we started. So I think it's a good balance of some of that. But yeah, like specifically, I know it exists. I know that, and I've heard many stories from many senior leaders that, they're in a boardroom and the male counterpart makes the same point and, they're kind of agreed with, whereas, and I think that's where having good mentors, having, somebody who is really your silent and vocal cheerleader,
Correct.
that's very helpful.
You're in top 50 HR leaders. So when you got this award, how did your colleagues take it?
So I'm in a team where I think everybody is happy for, the achievements of others. It's rare because, sometimes how competitive teams and organizations can be, it's a choice of whether you want to grow by growing others or whether you want to grow by pulling others down. So again, I've been lucky that it's not happened so much with me. The only thing I would say is that some of these awards and things that, one receives, firstly, it's not intentional, it just happens and it's great. It's not that, my existence is being validated by it. It's great. It gives a great launch pad, it gives a great platform and some of that. But it doesn't really define me and things like that. So I would actually, if given the choice, I would actually prefer that, rather the limelight on some of these awards, people start to actually value, going back to your question about women and things like that, people start to value their contribution and influence and decision making in the company.
Right.
It shouldn't take an award for people to be taken seriously. And I think that's happening as well.
So do performance ratings actually reflect any impact on the individuals in the companies?
See, I'll tell you, pay is something that's so personal. I mean, it's something that's so individualized. Performance ratings, I think most companies are going away from performance ratings because nobody likes labels. Nobody likes to be called a bucket, like a rater of 1 or 5 and things like that. Pay for performance, if done appropriately, can really boost productivity. But I don't think that this whole labeling of rating numbers, etc., is doing anybody any good right now.
Okay. So could you please guide our new HRs in the market who would want to start their career in the HR field? First of all, is it important to do the MBA for them? And if they want to start out without the MBA, then how can they do it? How can they do it? And if they want to start their career with MBA in HR, then what are the possible trends like HR analytics we have listened, then you talked about global compensation manager, then there could be HR recruitment, then there could be HR generalist. Is there anything else that we are missing out?
It's a good question. See, HR is very, very wide, and I think, going back a couple of decades, people used to think of it as an admin function.
Right.
It's really not, right? Like, because it's like think about using your smartphone only for making phone calls. You're not tapping into 90% of what HR has to offer if you just think of them as a team making rangolis. That's not the reality of today. So I think HR, you rightly pointed out there are various sub-functions. So there's talent acquisition, there's HR analytics, there's compensation, there may be benefits, there's recruitment, there are generalists, there are HR business partners and things like that. For somebody starting their career I have never been in recruitment because even my campus placement and some of that was in consulting. But a lot of people actually start their careers with sourcing and recruitment, and then they kind of move around. In terms of how somebody should start, is MBA hygiene or not? I think it depends on the levels that are going to get offered. So I don't think it's hygiene.
Right. So to end this podcast, एक थोड़ी सी help कर देते हैं हमारे HR aspirants की. So please tell us some red flags and green flags that you see in the people when you hire people in your team while taking interviews.
The biggest green flag for me is intent over intellect. If somebody comes across as someone who's willing to work hard, who wants to learn, who wants to contribute, I think that's the biggest green flag for me. The second is maybe just humility. Often, when I interview people from some of these top B schools and things like that, I've started to see a strain of we know it all. But you don't, like the person interviewing you, possibly has like decades of experience and things like that, right? So I think to be a good culture fit is more important than the technical expertise, because you learn on the job. If you're willing to learn, nothing can stop you.
Right.
If you're willing to work hard, nothing can stop you. I think it's that I test in interviews. So like when you asked me, right, like is it important for somebody to have a background of comp? Real life example, we've hired so many individuals with zero background of comp. They're actually from arts and humanities and some of that, never worked with numbers, and they're excelling. They're excelling. Why? Because of the sheer drive and willingness to work hard.
Right.
When I started my career in what I was scared of numbers. Numbers is not something that I naturally love. It's just that I've learned to not be uncomfortable with them, and I kind of can make sense of them now. But it was just that I wanted to work hard. I wanted to learn. I think that's more important than anything else.
And few red flags as well.
So red flags, like I said, right? Like if you believe that, I don't think that, even Satya Nadella or like Mark Zuckerberg or Sam Altman or Elon Musk will kind of stand up and say, we know everything. So if I'm speaking to a graduate and if it comes across as though, yeah, I know everything, I think that will just block your learning journey.
Correct.
Because then you feel like you know everything, you don't need to learn anything more and things like that. And then I think so that's the biggest red flag for me. The others are not really red flags, but like I said, if there's any kind of trait that, also dishonesty, right? Like today, you can give credit to at least the hiring manager. If you're having that round with your hiring manager, if I call your bluff, then it's not about the fact that you're bluffing. I think, it's okay to kind of sometimes inflate what you've done and things like that. But I really feel like the foundation of a good team, like, because nobody is great alone. Everything is teamwork at the end of the day. So the foundation of a good team is honesty and trust. Like, I don't think people in my team kind of say, oh, I'm sick, but they're going out partying. If they're going out partying, they'll tell me, I'm going out partying today, whatever. So you should just be able to trust. At the interview stage itself, if I feel like this person is not being fully honest, then I'll be a little wary. It won't be a red flag, but I'll be like, either it'll be like a white lie that, okay, theek hai, it's fine, like, they're young people, it's okay. Or if I feel like you're really trying to, then I'll be a little wary that, nahi.
So guys, हमने यही समझा कि interviewer is very smart. They'll get to know if you're trying to bluff or you're trying to be very loyal in the interviews. And it is okay if you do not do 100% in the interviews. आप थोड़ा सा अगर 90% भी दोगे then also it's okay, and be open to learning. This is what we have learned, and I think हमने पूरा HR का जो सर्कल है वो complete आज कर लिया अर्शिया के साथ. Thank you so much Arshiya for this amazing insights that you have given. And if you would want to see her again in future, then you will have to share a lot of love on this video. So keep liking, keep subscribing, and keep sharing. And we'll share the details about Arshiya in the description box. If you would want to connect with her, you can connect with her over LinkedIn and tell her what did you learn from this podcast, and do also comments that आपने इससे क्या सीखा. So guys, take care and keep subscribing. Bye bye.